The title of the talk is related to something that we will see toward the end. So it might not make much sense now, but I promise it will. So let's talk about multiomic analysis. That's the title of the talk. Multiomic refers to the instances in which we use multiple omic technologies to try to answer a question. This happens to be a very important challenge and a very important set of questions because, as you might imagine, no problem lives in isolation. If you truly want to understand the impact of a molecular disruption, for example, you might need to look into the whole host. And in situations like infectious disease, for example, you might need to look at multiple hosts. So multiomic is deeply connected with multi-scale analysis. I'm going to propose that the two most important questions, or among the most important questions in infectious disease, are these two questions. One is resilience. What makes a subject resilient to an infection? We saw it with COVID, with the pandemic. Some people became severely ill. Some people survived without symptoms. And we don't have a satisfactory answer. Why is that the case? Think about other non-infectious diseases, or maybe infections, we don't know. Mental health. Why is it the case that in some cases, a challenge to the body results in a perturbation of mental states? There are many things that we truly don't know. And in the case of infectious diseases, every time that we introduce a countermeasure, pharmaceutical countermeasure of a vaccine, we risk the pathogen overcoming it. So wouldn't it be better to strengthen the host instead of attacking the pathogen? So how do we answer these two questions? We cannot do it only with genomic information, only with transcriptional information or pathology, fill the blank. We need to cross multiple data domains and multiple scales. And that has been my quest for the past, now, 15 years. So looking at all the scales from the molecular realm to even the solar system, turns out that mosquitoes are most active, some species, during full moon. So you have a greater rate of infection. So indeed, if we're going to talk about multi-scale, we have to look even at the moon. Once we try to connect all this, then you might want to go across multiple scales in some sort of cohesive manner. So epidemiologically, we can connect those with the moon. Then we can do epidemiology with vector dispersal. We can do the interface between vector hosts and what happens with the immune system or microbiomes. Then you have the interactions that take care of at the molecular and cellular level and molecular level. And finally, we can go all the way to computational drug design. So that's what we're going to try to answer today. And you can imagine immediately that is going to be a challenge, and I hope that you see it immediately. How do we train people to do this? That is going to be the first obstacle, because I'm going to guess that all of you are being trained or have been trained to do something specific. Maybe broad in some sense. We're in a discipline. We are interdisciplinary scientists. But crossing those domains become incredibly difficult. So with an army of graduate students, postdocs, and colleagues, we have been able to poke at the problem that I'll show you in a moment from multiple scales. But now we have aid to do this. We have enhanced intelligence. We have augmented intelligence in the form of, you have guessed it, large language models and artificial intelligence. 2023 will be remembered more than 2017 when the paper came out as the year that it went mainstream. It just transformed everything overnight. It was ChatGPT 3.5. Of course, people working in computer science, computational domains, we have been seeing this coming for a while. But it really went mainstream in 2023. Everybody has a definition of artificial intelligence. I'm going to offer one that will be instrumental for us today. And to offer this is going to be the etymological roots of artificial intelligence. So it comes from Latin, artificium, which is handicraft, and artificialis is artificial. That's easy. Now, inter, between, intercontinental. Legere, choose. So intelligere, choose between. Intelligere, understand. Intelligentsia, intelligence. So essentially, artificial intelligence is just manufactured understanding. And it makes a lot of sense today, now that we have large language models, and we can start asking these large language models to answer questions to enhance our understanding. And there lies the problem. Because as we will see, there is a huge risk of falling into something that we will call invalidations. Forget about hallucinations. Hallucination is a misnomer. Is a poorly defined phenomenon. Something else is going on truly, and we need a new word for it. So invalidation will be the word that we will use. So as you know, coding was the way to access generative AI or any sort of artificial intelligence. So those who were in computational domains had access to it. Many people who work today in labs, very competent scientists, still cannot code because it's not part of the corpus of training. Large language models, of course, change this, and this starts with 2017. Attention is all you need. If you haven't read that manuscript, I highly recommend it. It's a very important piece in the history of science, so go and read it. Particularly because it uses this self-attention mechanism, and that's the trick. If you go around the web and start scouting tips to have ChatGPT work for you or Anthropic Cloud, you will find a bunch of advice. I mean, much of it is not very useful. If you want the best advice to use these tools, read this paper. And if you can connect your strategy to the minimization that is happening there, then that's the best thing that you can do, and you can't do much more than that, truly. The self-attention is important, and we will see it in practice in just a moment. So if you have interacted with a large language model, because of this self-attention mechanism, you know that it will start having trouble in long interactions. How many of you, show of hands, and please be honest, that you don't have to impress anybody, how many of you have had interactions of more than 100 queries with GPT? A few. More than 1,000 queries? Nobody. Okay. It might take a few hundred to get something done in multiomic. And I'm going to give you the links to a few of those instances. So if you have interacted with a large language model, you have noticed that it seems to forget stuff. It might give you answers that you were not after, and that might have been addressed before in the interaction. If you have not experienced this phenomenon yet, it's because you have not used these tools in long interactions. But I can assure you, and you can experience it yourselves, it will happen. And this is due to the fact that memory span is limited, even if you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of tokens with the most advanced model. And this is due to the fixed length context window that these models have. So practical advice, I'm going to give you some advice that is actually rooted in the way the systems work, and is the first thing that you might want to take out of here. So in the personalization area of ChatGPT, and you can do the same with others, you just send a set of instructions at the beginning of your interaction. Enter directives. I'm going to give you the directives that work for me. I'm going to list them all, and then I'm going to zoom in, because if I don't zoom in, then I cannot move it forward. Okay, let's see. So no adjectives, give me detailed answers. Answers in paragraphs, as you know, it gives bulleted lists. There is a list of keywords that are typical in certain large language models, so you might want to introduce that list. Don't use these words. Tapestry is one of those. you can request references with URLs. This is challenging, but it works sometimes, and this is something for Jupyter. Participial phrases, that's the other telltale of these models. Having been in a conference, now I feel compelled to tell you that's a participial phrase. And you can provide a writing of a sample of your own writing. Why? Because you want that to emulate what you're doing. Now, how do we eliminate these memory span problems? You can start, after you provide your directives, echo back what I want to do. And then once you find something interesting, you want to put it in memory. Maybe you have experienced this with, let's say, ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude. And I'm going to focus on just a few of them. Forget about the generic large language models, the one that we in the academic world can manipulate ourselves and train ourselves. I'm focusing on the very large ones. And after you find a useful answer, you might want to create an index. Mark this answer as answer whatever numbering system works for you. It could be 1, A, B, C, etc. And as you interact in a long exchange, you need to keep track of this. You can say combine answer A1 with B3 into a single paragraph and enforce directive 4. It's actually quite effective in doing this. Now, this is very simple. All of you have used these tools, so I don't pretend to have told you something revealing or transformative about how things work. I just wanted to put on the table what we know and how we interact with these systems, because the interesting part comes later. When we talk about science, you need to ask a very precise question. And these precise questions, I'm going to give you an example. This is an example that all students fail, because if you ask about it naively, no large language model will give you a satisfactory answer. So you know that, oops, I revealed it. 1 minus 1/3 minus 2/3. What is the answer to that basic mathematical operation? And of course, you saw the answer is not 0. Naively, you would say it is 0, 1 minus 1/3 minus 2/3, but it's not 0. So, of course, those computational people will know this. What is 1 minus 2/3 minus 1/3? Anybody? Take a risk in life. Say something. 0. Not 0, thank you. And most important, different from the previous one, because addition is not commutative in floating point arithmetic. And this is surprising for many students when they face computation the first time. Now, this one, 10 to the 20 plus 1 minus 10 to the 20. What is the answer?
1, 0.
We have two answers. 0 wins. Yes, it's 0. And the reason is rounding error. And 10 to the 10 plus 1 minus 10 to the 10. My point with this is not to show off about numerical analysis, is to show you that these are not trivial questions. Now, you can ask GPT, and this is what I ask students, go and produce the explanation of why is this the case. Go to the algorithm of floating point representation and produce a program that computes and produces exactly those numbers, which you can do. It's a very interesting exercise in numerical analysis. In this moment, large language models fail miserably at this task. And that's revealing, because then the question is, can we use them to do something useful? And the answer is yes. So what capabilities have become obsolete? What new capabilities do we have? And how to use these tools effectively? And how to develop a workforce? This is one of my main concerns. How do we train people to use these things effectively so that everybody with equity has access to this race? So the answer is going to be in data science. Our need for data science has just increased, so do not believe the hype around obsolescence of programming skills. You need to be a better programmer now that you have these tools. Why? Because they produce massive amounts of code very quickly and could be garbage. And you need to be able to tell when it's garbage and when it's useful. So you need to be a better programmer. Programming is to data science what typing is to composition. It helps, but it's not the thing. There are other things that are more important. Among those things, ethics in data analytics. How does ethics come into play in genomic data, transcriptional data? How was the data collected? How is the data used? Who has access to the data? Data collection and cleaning, and I'll show you an example today in which data cleaning is a real challenge. Exploratory analysis, that's what most of you have been trained to do. In our colleges and universities, we train students to do exploratory and data modeling, and we call it that's it. That's what it is, but there is an entire universe around it that makes it challenging to produce results that are reproducible. So now, let's go to the challenges of large language models. Hallucinations. This has been discussed by many people. The phenomenon is well known, or at least has been well advertised. And these hallucinations are instances when information is not correct, but is generated and presented as if it were true. I'm proposing that we need something else. A hallucination, we can call it just an unfortunate choice to describe this phenomenon, because invalidation is a phenomenon in which reality is misrepresented due to local constraints, and those local constraints is the minimization process that is happening in large language models, and because it's so convincing, you might acquire it, propagate it, and then it becomes a problem for everybody. How many of you have been has been a research assistant in their entire careers? Okay, a few hands. Good. Maybe this sounds familiar. The PI says, we need to do X. You go and take this piece and do it. And then the research assistant goes and does it, and then comes back with an answer. And then everybody is, we're in a rush. Looks good, put it in the paper. And it goes to a peer review. Who is going to review that the figure has the axis as you intended to be, or that the code is reproducible? That's why computational research has a high degree of irreproducibility. Do any of you want to venture what is the range of irreproducible results in science? Say a percentage between 0 and 100.
80.
Yes, something around in that area, which is mind-blowing. 80% irreproducible. If it is computation, it's just a program. It's just a script. It's just a file. But we are there. So cases of invalidation in the history of science, yes, geocentric model of the universe, ether, phlogiston theory, and so on. So we can build a very simple mathematical model to study this phenomenon. So we're going to generate a set of a discursive network. And in this discursive network, we're going to adjudicate probabilities of convincing somebody that what you're saying is true, even if it is false. And then we can study this as multiple actors. It's a very simple mathematical procedure. And I would love to show you the manuscript, if I can find it here. This is the manuscript. And I have not put it in the archive yet because I want to gather feedback this week before I put it out. But this entire manuscript that has the introduction, the description of invalidation versus hallucination, some epistemological framework, historical references, and a mathematical model with a set of propositions, theorems, examples, was entirely generated by a large language model. I didn't write a single word in this manuscript. That is not to say that you can simply say, ChatGPT, write me a paper that I want to publish. It does not work like that. Actually, doing this is very difficult. And I'll show you why. Well, I just want to present the first model. I have 10 minutes left, so I'll try to accelerate through this part. The first model is just when you have two A single discursive network with many actors, and there are valid and invalid statements, and I'm trying to find the plots. What are the plots? I think that I have to go back to the slides. So red is false, blue is faithful to reality. So if you have false statements with a single source that is in a single discursive network, it is guaranteed that falsehoods will exist in the network. You will not get rid of them, period. It's guaranteed. That is, if you're using, and I have the math proof of that, if you're using only GPT, you're in trouble for scientific work. When you have a complex set of statements and actors, and you're trying to accomplish a complex set of propositions. By complex, I mean many. You might need to use two. So that's where Anthropic's Claude comes into play. Now you have two that are very powerful. That is, they have a very large number of parameters, and they have a knowledge base that you can contrast with each other. This is a single discursive network, EQ8 discursive network with large language model. Now, what happens when we introduce cross-network invalidation? So the things change. Now we can introduce the entire set of constraints. If anybody's interested in this area, please, let's work on this together. Authors are welcome. We can put the effort in. And something very interesting happens. And what happens is, here it is. That those falsehoods, those invalidations can be removed from the system. At least, I don't mean the system remove them from GPT. It doesn't work like that. You're not extracting false information from there. You're just generating based on the context. You can eliminate falsehoods or minimize the likelihood of finding falsehoods in the set of statements that you're generating to solve a practical problem. And it's very simple. Why does it happen? Well, let's take a look at, and forget about the algorithm. You would have to read a lot there. Let's take a look at the image. This is what we could do to minimize the risk of these invalidations occur. Make a request to a large language model. And I'll show you an example of what a request looks like. Distribute to multiple large language models. Get the answers. You can take the answers of each one of them and present it to the others and say, find the flaws. Because turns out it's a lot easier to find a flaw in other actors' speech. And the reason it happens, at least in large language models, is because those flaws, this information that might not be accurate, was generated due to the architecture of these systems. They try to provide plausible explanations, plausible language. And when you contrast that with other, it's very unlikely, nearly zero the probability that it will find itself in the same local minimum. So it will be able to spot it and say, this doesn't match. So by doing this, you assemble, you present it back until all of them agree, I cannot find any flaws. And it works in practice. It works beautifully. So just kind of start producing things that you need for your research. So hands-on, we don't need to do this. Now, finally, multi-omic. That was the promise in the title, because this is computational genomics anyhow. So this is an experiment in which immune profiling, microbiome, functional genomics, epigenomics, metabolomics, proteomics, lipidomics, pathology was produced. And that in addition to telemetry from surgically implanted telemetry devices. So massive amount of data and a very large team of scientists. And I can assure you that the people doing immune profiling were not the ones doing proteomics. It's totally different sets of skills. So in this particular, I have 5 minutes left according to my clock. So here we're going to focus on 2 experiments. And these 2 experiments have to do with a set of monkeys that became severely ill when challenged with Plasmodium knowlesi, and those who survived. Turns out that Macaca mulata, rhesus monkeys, they die with knowlesi, and Macaca fascicularis, they might survive. They become ill, but they might survive. So what is different? That's the question that I posed at the beginning in slide number 1. This is what we want to find out. So how can we do it? Well, we have to harmonize all this data. How do we harmonize the data? We go to the public repositories. Then we take a look, in this case, functional genomics. Let's start there. If you go to functional genomics, that file looks like this, ugly and all. I didn't change the colors. That's the raw file that you encounter there. There is a gene symbol right here. These are level of expression. And I'm going to move away from the red color that makes it impossible to read. But here you have an individual, T01, time 1, then time 2. This is a very convoluted format. So just extracting the data from the Excel file that you find in Geo to start with functional genomics is in itself a task, a huge task. So if you want to know how to do it with LLMs, I put there a link to ChatGPT. And you can just focus on the word 2024 CGSI-JPG, my initials. And this is one of the examples for functional genomics. And you will see probably 100 iterations just to get to be able to extract information from the file. But the interesting thing is this. I'm going to move toward the conclusions. Oops. The conclusions, last 2 minutes. Very simple. They're very powerful tools, yes. You have to be careful with invalidation. That means you should never use a single source of information because invalidation will take place. And it will take a lot of cognitive power to identify it and filter it. Therefore, it will take a lot of time. You save time if you contrast the results from 2 different models. Consensus approaches, this is what I was telling you. You can put the 2 together. It can minimize or eliminate the invalidation of information. And this is a larger question. It happens in AI, but also happens in reality. Are we talking about something that is common to systems in which language and exchange of information takes place? Maybe we're witnessing a universal phenomenon, and it might be worth considering that when you have a single source of information, look at news deserts in the US, falsehoods start to propagate a lot faster than in places where there are multiple sources of information. So with this, I have examples of each one of those levels of technologies, how to do the proteomics, how to integrate those together. Is not easy. I can tell you after doing this for some time that the cognitive overload is tremendous. You're competing with a machine. The machine can generate these things very quickly, and then you have to consume all this information, filter. I have not been able to find a way to automate this process. I mean, I can write the code and send queries, but they come back and you have to digest it still. So automation in this moment, we might be able to accelerate small pieces, but the bulk of the time goes into trying to harmonize information. So anyway, I just wanted to bring this to your attention. Please consider using these tools for the sort of analysis that we conduct. You can do transcription analysis very quickly. It produces the code for you. You just have to make sure that you're using it properly. You can create harmonizations about very complex data sets. It's not going to do the job for you. It's like a car. It will help you get faster to your destination. And that's what we need to do. The final question is, should we then disclose ChatGPT as a co-author of our manuscripts? My position is no, we don't. Do you write in your manuscripts, this manuscript was written with a Logitech keyboard? Large language models are being commoditized. And the more we have, the more competition will be, the more you will be able to integrate, but it's now part of how we do business. It's just another tool. It's not an entity with feelings and personality. It's just a tool. and we should use it properly. Thank you for your attention.